out of all of this, that, you guys got so offended by what Rick Beato said. Out of all of this, that is easily the most offensive thing that has been said. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, Jon Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's Riff of the Week. All right, earlier in the month, Rick Beato put out a video called The Real Reason Why Music is Getting Worse.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. We're gonna try something new today. This video is on the history of the music business and technology in 2 acts. Act 1. Music is too easy to make. Act 2. Music is too easy to consume.
And did he piss off the internet bad? And he got a lot of criticism, which caused him to put out a follow-up video to try and elaborate on his points. And then Anthony Fantano put out a reaction video. And then Become the Night put out a reaction video reacting to Anthony Fantano's video. And now I'm going to react to Become the Night's video, reacting to Anthony Fantano's video, reacting to Rick Beato's video. And I think every single one of us has something to add to this conversation. I think that Anthony made some points that are worth considering, also some points that are worth absolutely dunking on. And then Become the Night made really great points and a few that I want to dispute, but I want to make it real clear, even when I dispute these points, I really appreciate Become the Night's content. I've gotten a lot out of it. I've gotten a lot out of Rick Beato's content too. Become the Night is really good at analyzing music. I highly suggest that you subscribe to his channel and check out some of his analysis. Analysis is the thing we do here, and his is excellent. But I think I can add some things here to this conversation. So without further ado, let's react to the reaction of the original.
Anthony Fantano decided to make a response to Rick Beato's video that I think was partly good, partly unfortunate, and partly just straight up bad faith. I have a lot of thoughts on both videos, more than can fit into one video, because this is an extremely complicated topic that has multiple facets to it that need a lot of time to sit down and tease out the nuances of.
I just don't really feel like these are good pieces of content, and the cases they make are illogical. They are not coherent, and frankly, for somebody who is as smart and as studied and as experienced as Rick, I feel like the statements made in these videos are beneath him.
Beneath him is strong. What is he guilty of that is so bad, other than saying a few things that you disagree with, or perhaps you don't like the way he reasoned through his arguments or presented them? Okay, but beneath him? What high crimes and misdemeanors did Rick Beato commit with his YouTube video where he gave his opinion?
But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that most of Rick's rant or commentary videos are really more shower thoughts than anything else.
I love that term, shower thoughts. That's great, because that most of us that are putting out our hot takes on YouTube or Twitter or whatever, that's exactly what that is. Thinking about something in the shower, or perhaps on your commute home from the office, and you just send out a little tweet or come home and make a little YouTube short. It's really not that big of a deal.
The first video isn't even really bolstered. A lot of these points are just like kind of put out there, and they're meant to be just like kind of accepted without much scrutiny.
The fundamental problem that Fantano seems to be alluding to here is that Rick does not seem to know how to test his own arguments. He is not the great at asking himself questions that actually probe his own held beliefs. For the record, this is a very difficult thing to do that takes a lifetime to practice, and most people still are not very good at it. But yeah, I don't think Rick Beato is a very rigorous thinker, and that's completely fine. He's a musician, he's a producer. This is not his strong suit. This is not something he has to do in order to make art or be a good technician. So, fundamental problem, do not approach Rick as a philosopher or a thought leader. Approach him as an old studio dog who is monologuing about his point of view.
Right, because philosophy is hard. And I think we should give people grace with that idea in mind. A lot of people who have studied philosophy, I feel, are too quick to hold normal people, like all of us, to those lofty standards. There's a lot of debate hall nerds that are just itching to pull their trigger fingers when they notice something that doesn't fit those standards. It's like a sports fan watching college football and they notice a play and they go, well, actually, you have committed the classic blunder. You have committed a post hoc fallacy. And you care more about these sort of structured rules rather than having an honest conversation like a normal human being.
I think realizing that these are shower thoughts, Fantano could have probably approached this with a little more charity.
100. This is not Rick Beato, writing a term paper and submitting it for peer review, even though that's kind of what we're all doing right now. Also, while I agree with a majority of the points that Become the Night makes in this video, you will find that he is also being uncharitable several times and in certain cases downright mean.
Rick then goes on in his video to use Frank Sinatra as an example of why it was so difficult to make music back in the day.
Frank Sinatra used to get up in front of an orchestra and sing a vocal take, and they had one microphone. And they would get it balanced just right. Frank would say, okay, I'm ready to do it, and he'd sing it. Come fly with me.
Fantano then in his video tries to refute this claim by saying that because there was a whole studio system and team around Frank Sinatra doing not just the production, but the writing, the performances, blah, 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 that it was actually very easy for Frank Sinatra to make music. And he says, easy as pie.
When we're talking about like ease of creation here, specifically in regards to Frank Sinatra, I feel like Rick is kind of overlooking the fact that like there was a whole like system of support behind an artist like Frank, allowing for what he was doing to be as easy as pie, essentially. I mean, for sure, he had to sing well when he was in front of the microphone. That much is true. But Frank also had loads of producers and sound engineers and orchestra musicians, as well as arrangers and, also songwriters, so that when old Blue Eyes stepped up to the microphone to do his thing, his songs weren't trash.
And I have to just stop and drop my jaw in absolute awe of how Fantano could hilariously miss the entire point of the statement. Rick was not saying Frank Sinatra personally had it harder as an artist than artists do today. He's talking about how hard it was to make a recorded song. That was very obvious. You literally built your entire point around referencing the team that Frank Sinatra had to use to make a well-recorded sounding song back in the day, which literally proves Rick's point. It is the proof that it was way harder to do that shit back in the day.
Out of all of this, that, you guys got so offended by what Rick Beato said. Out of all of this, that is easily the most offensive thing that has been said. What Frank Sinatra did was easy as pie because he had a team. Yeah, he had a team. There was a veritable army of people working on that recording. That means it was more difficult to make that recording than it is today when you can just do it all in your bedroom. You can program the drums. You can program the bass. You can punch in the guitar parts. You can punch in the vocal parts. You can do auto-tune. You can sample. You don't even have to write the music today. You don't have to bring in experts at their instrument. He was singing in front of an orchestra and they recorded the orchestra live. Literally nobody in the orchestra could make a mistake. Frank Sinatra could not make a mistake because there was no autotune and there was no punch in. They had to spend all day long, figuring out where to put the mics to get the right sound because they've got to record this all in one take. How many mics does it have? How many tracks do you have available? Nowadays, we've got unlimited tracks. Back then, they didn't. And tape is expensive. That is the craziest, most idiotic take. I cannot believe that. That is easily the most offensive thing that was said in this whole entire thing.
So first, let's explain why what Rick said is blatantly wrong, but then let's reframe it. Let's steelman Rick so that he would agree with what I'm gonna say in order to make the best case possible.
Yes. Now this is how you approach something in good faith. You should definitely steelman the ideas that you're trying to engage with. Anytime somebody does something that's just easily dismissing something, you got to come at that with a little bit of skepticism. When Rick Beato puts out a video like this and the response is, "Boomer, old man yells at clouds," like, yeah, that was real easy. You really didn't put any thought into that rebuttal. You didn't really engage the material in any manner of good faith. You didn't think about where he might have a point. Here's the big thing. We can't listen to somebody's opinion and we always take their opinion to their logical conclusion. Rick Beato says that technology is limiting people's ability to innovate. So therefore, what he must mean is all technology is bad and we should not be using technology when we make music. And that is not what he's saying at all. Now, did he clumsily make his point while he was just riffing in front of the camera? Maybe. But also, it's kind of depending on us not to be so literal and to understand, like Become the Night is saying here, that they're shower thoughts, and approach it with good faith, not be such assholes about it. You know, I'm sure if we had a conversation in a room, we could talk about the overuse of technology, and most of us would agree with that. Most of us would look at an artist that overuses auto-tune or only samples drums and never ever plays any instruments, that there's some merit there. But because we took those statements to their logical conclusion, their most extreme, we can't really have a good conversation. So I have to applaud Become the Night here for doing what is, like he said, in good faith and steelmanning the argument.
Given that the end of this phrase is limits the ability of people to innovate, combined with all the previous examples that he was talking about, I think this gives us a clue as to what Rick was actually trying to say. So let's reframe and steelman Rick's position in the best faith way possible. I'm about to do a lot of reading, so hopefully this doesn't bore you, but I think Rick's position is: the current advancement in music technology has made it take far less time and knowledge to make marketable music. This is beginning to dehumanize music. The steps it took to achieve a result in the analog space with hardware, connections, knob settings are being reduced to under-the-hood algorithms to get a similar result in a more user-friendly fashion. Because of this, one, people don't have a fundamental understanding of how or why these results are happening. They also don't have access to altering any of them underneath the hood. Therefore, less sound experimentation will take place. And less experimentation will result in more music all sounding the same. Two, algorithms are built to create a desired end result determined by the manufacturer, not by the artist. In order to maintain quality control and consistency, and they're hoping for that being user satisfaction, the algorithms limit the user's ability to screw things up, to mess with the formula that works, in quotes. This results in a plug-and-play culture of music creation. People who are fine with something that sounds like all of their heroes. And this drives people away from finding their own voice. This also minimizes the talent needed to achieve a desirable result. This results in lower talent music that doesn't understand the nuances of composition, arrangement, production, and how these three processes all interplay with one another. A large portion of the talent, both in sound design and in performance, is purchased as a plugin designed by someone else's voice and standard. The same way that placing a microphone on an amp changes the EQ curve of the entire guitar tone so that any post-processing is all colored with this sonic character, is similar to how there is a layer of mix-ready plugins and presets that colors all of the art that we make today, and less people have the knowledge to explore outside of those boundaries. Usually a machine's goal is predictable, reproducible, reproducible results. This frees up human resources to be applied elsewhere, but humans are not as precise as machines. When you see a guitarist going for a wicked solo live, part of the appeal is the competency, but part of it is the risk of failure. Seeing a fellow human do something elevated above our mundanity is part of the beauty. But sometimes part of the appeal is the humanity, the inconsistencies or the imperfections. This is where passionate emotions get communicated. Music made perfectly in time or in tune, predictable and stable, provides more of a sense of calm. The exciting stuff comes from those expectations being subverted, but also by how they're subverted. We lose the human quality of making beautiful mistakes or accidental discoveries when our technology keeps us on such strict safety bumpers. It also can limit certain parameters of emotional expression.
100%. And I absolutely believe that that is what Rick Beato meant. You know, I have often on this podcast complained that metalcore guitars all sound the same. And the reason why is because they're all using quad cortex or axe effects to get their guitar tone. And if you play guitar, if you ever Google guitar or anything, your targeted ads will be plugins where you can sound like your favorite artist. You can download this little bit of information and now your guitar tone sounds like Gojira. Now your guitar tone sounds like Architects, which is fantastic. But what that means is in the past, you would have your amp. I had the amp that I could afford. I definitely could not afford all the amps like what we have now with amp modeling technology. And I had to sit in a room and play with the knobs and dial in my tone, which gave me somewhat of a basic understanding of what those knobs did, not just in isolation, but also what they did in relation to each other. And the same thing happens in the studio, because when you go to the studio, you've hopefully done your homework, because studio time used to be expensive. So you've hopefully already done most of the arranging and figured out kind of what sort of tone you're going after. But once you get there, that room is different than the room that you rehearsed in. So now you have to dial in that sound again, because the room sounds different and the mic placement matters. And so once again, you're in the studio turning the knobs and dialing it in. You don't just plug in and start playing, because you've already got great tones digitally. And because you don't have all the tones at your fingertips, you are at the mercy of the room and the equipment you have. You do the best you can, but also that sound is going to be different than somebody's sound across the country or across the globe in a different room with a different mixing board and a different mic and a different amp and a different guitar and a different player. And that's why music in the past sounded so much differently from each other, despite being in the same genre.
Let's go back to Fantano. Fantano starts digging into Rick's take on quantized music, and Fantano says that really the genre that has this issue the most is rock.
From this point, Rick goes on a whole diatribe about quantizing and drum machines and drum parts and grooves sounding super rigid and just soulless as a result of the way we've kind of locked things to the grid in the studio, in the DAW, which again, we're also doing like a lot of glossing over key and vital parts of music history here. We're also making a lot of presumptions with these points, because what Rick is saying here totally ignores the rich history of music, pop and otherwise, that involves like drum machine tech and was arguably very creative, very influential, just as good as any Led Zeppelin or Pat Metheny record. For example, there are drum machines all over Prince's Purple Rain. Are we really going to sit here and argue that there's less like artistic merit to Prince's Purple Rain because there's drum beats on that record that are locked to the grid of a drum machine?
See, this is what I'm talking about. Somebody makes a criticism about a certain aspect. In this case, we'll talk about quantizing drums and them sounding machine perfect because they're snapped to the grid. And somebody will come up with an example, an exception that Exceptions prove the rule. They don't disprove the rule. You bring up one of the greatest artists of all time in Prince. Of course, this creative genius was able to use the technology in a creative way and come up with many great things. That doesn't mean that the hordes of musicians that are not Prince, that their overuse of technology is now beyond reproach. Exceptions to the rule are by their very definition exceptional. It's like when I criticize country music as the formulaic, commercialized drivel written by carpetbaggers to pander to the lowest common denominator stereotypes of Southern people and then prepackaged and sold by beautiful people from Nashville. Somebody might say, yeah, but what about Jason Isbell? What about Sturgill Simpson? And I say, yes, those artists are amazing. That does not invalidate the criticism I just made about the scores of other fake rednecks making terrible music.
And from here, also think about the ways in which drum machines and sequence beats revolutionized electronic music, led to the advent of hip hop. Honestly and truly, the only genre of music that this is like sort of an issue for is rock.
I do think it pretty much only affects rock because rock has different expectations than pop and hip hop. You know, in rock music, we sort of expect the musicians to play the music. In hip hop, obviously, it's okay to sample. And in pop, it's okay to sample. It's even okay to lip sync.
This is an instance where I'm actually kind of in agreement with Rick and with Fantano. I'm kind of torn. Like I just said, locking music to a grid on tempo is a surefire way of making things sound really tight, which can be super impactful, but it also can lose the human element and make things feel more unnatural, or in another way, very safe. I mean, yeah, if you have gridded music, there are other conventions you can break on other metrics or parameters to make it feel more unsafe. But if we're looking at one metric, one parameter, on-grid is more safe than off-grid. On the other hand, Fantano is correct that there has been a ton of music that has been locked to the grid that has been fantastic. I think there can be merit in music that is locked to a grid. Absolutely. But if the majority of what we listen to is locked to a grid, I think that this could potentially present a problem. I would have to do more study and more thought on this before I would come to a definitive answer. But my intuitions and my life experience really point me towards there being a potential problem in society and in culture if we start listening to exclusively gridded music. It's something just doesn't feel right about that.
Dude. That's the least of our problems. Now we've got AI music, and it's only getting better. And what's worse is the platforms are embracing it, or at least not shunning it.
This is Spotify's way of using AI. They have AI songs, they attribute them to people that don't exist, and this allows them to take royalties that would go to musicians and keep them for themselves.
On the AI front related to music is too easy to make, I made a video last week called I Told You This Was Going to Happen, and I played some songs off Udio, and I was saying how my kids could detect that they were AI songs, but other people could not. Well, it just came out. All three major labels are suing AI startups for copyright infringement. Universal Music Group, Sony Music, and Warner Music are suing Suno and Udio for copyright infringement because guess what? They're using all their music to train these AI models. Well, of course they are. How else are they going to train it? Now, companies like Universal are not doing it for the good of their music to protect their copyright owners. What's going on here is they just announced that they're partnering with a company called SoundLab to make AI models of their artists for themselves. They can use this SoundLab plugin in Pro Tools or Logic, and you can sing your own voice and replace it with one of their artists like Drake or Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish, or whoever agrees to this. And I guarantee you all these labels are going to do that because they want to own the AI versions of these songs. Whether you create it or whether they create it, they're going to own it. And just to show you how easy it is to model someone's voice with AI, I'm speaking to you through a voice modeling program called 11 Labs that was trained on my voice over a 4-week period.
And once again, if you go on the internet and criticize AI music or AI art, here come the replies excoriating you, saying that you don't understand, saying that this is technology and it's the same as the horse and carriage maker when the car was invented. And these people all saying this probably all used to have those Bored Ape NFT avatars, so I don't really give a shit what they say.
Yes, sampling is an art, and it's a valid one, but it's not as impressive as playing the parts for real. Just like me curating what images Midjourney spits out to me is not as impressive as drawing an awesome picture myself.
Not only is it not as impressive, but it's infuriating to me when, again, you make a criticism of AI art and all of those bros come into your replies to get offended on behalf of a robot. And they're, oh God, people come in my replies and they say, I wrote this song using AI. No, you didn't. You did not write a song.
So for those of you that keep writing to me every day, I get about 20 of these a day, and they always start, Rick, I wrote a song that I think could be a hit. I used AI to hear it because I know nothing about making music. That's literally from an email I got yesterday.
The closest thing that you are to a songwriter is a Hollywood producer, their relationship to a filmmaker. The guys in the corporations in Hollywood that tell the directors, you should do this. They had an effect on the film, but ultimately the director and the actors are the filmmaker. You are a prompter. You are not a songwriter. You put in some suggestions and the robot did it for you. You told the director, I want an action movie with a film noir style, and I want this actor to be in it. You're a producer, not a filmmaker.
And while you did make some great counters in your argument, I think you may be sticking Rick with positions he doesn't actually hold, and partially it's because he just doesn't know how to freaking talk. Fantano sticking Rick with positions he doesn't hold will be a recurring theme.
Right, I agree. Fantano definitely stuck Rick with positions that he does not hold, but Become the Night's about to do the same thing to Fantano a little bit later in the episode. I'll point it out when it comes, and that's what I'm talking about. That's the natural thing that humans who aren't trained in debate and philosophy do to each other. If all you have to do is look at the discourse on Twitter or YouTube, and all the time people will say A, and then the people listening will go, so what you mean is, and say some other thing. Because they take their arguments either too literally or to their logical conclusion without the benefit of nuance or, well, what about in this situation? Oh, well, yeah, that situation is different. You don't give the people that chance, and really this format doesn't allow for that because it's not a normal in-the-room conversation.
I do hear a fair amount of rock music recordings or metal music recordings where the drums or the grooves are, yes, very snapped to the grid. And sometimes that is so much so the case that the drum parts sound just flat and soulless and boring and mechanical and awful to listen to. But I mean, that's not really the technology's issue. That's the issue of the artists applying the technology, sucking at applying the technology.
On this, we can absolutely agree.
Okay, 100% agreed there, Fantano. 100% agreed there. People don't have to quantize the drums. It is not a law that you shall program and quantize the drums or the bass. There's no law that says you must use auto-tune exclusively.
I mean, I get that a John Bonham drum beat with a shuffle doesn't sound good when you quantize it, but that doesn't mean all quantizing is wrong or bad.
I don't think Rick ever claimed this. I mean, like I said, granted, he's not really good at formulating words to convey his thoughts. But again, I think you're sticking him with a position he never claimed to have.
From here, Rick is kind of quick to assume that current day tech basically streamlines everything about music creation rather than adding more complications actually sometimes. And his key example of that is a drum set.
If we aggregate time lost versus time saved, 1,000% music tech streamlines the process. Are you high? There is no question about this. Saying it takes a lot of time to sift through already recorded material and that makes it more complicated or more complex misses the point entirely. Fantano then goes on to cite Rick's comparison of recording drums to using sampled drums. He does admit that recording real drums is hard, but then he drops this gem.
Which you could play in any manner that you like, tune in any manner that you like, mic in any manner that you like. Yes, that is true. And while yes, that is time consuming, so is going through 1,000 snare one-shots in Logic.
So I have seen this where you load up your drum programming software and there's just a million snare sounds. And yeah, you can get paralysis by analysis, going through which drum sound should I use? Which one is the best for this song? And if you do that, good. That means that you care about what you're doing and you're not, just picking the first one because it works. Plug and play, look at this thing I created. If you're going through all of those snare hits, all of those drum fills, and picking the one that fits the song the best, good. That's great. I'm saying people respond to incentives and they don't really do that. And again, the point that both of these gentlemen are making is that's not the technology's fault, it is the user's fault. 100% agree.
I don't need to explain why this is stupid. Comparing the difficulty of recording one good drum sound to having to choose between thousands of great recorded drum sounds that you didn't have to record is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I hate to keep beating this point, but every one of those drum sounds is going to sound good because the people making that software put the time in to record all of those sounds. And if you want to really think about it, all of those sounds that you have the option of choosing also was a problem for the people recording them, because it's not just say, hey, pick this pearl snare, hit it. Okay, now let's pick a Thomas snare, hit it. No, you can put the mic in a different place. You can treat the room differently. So with recording real drums, there is an impossible amount of options as well.
And to this point, I think Fantano was just huffing some straight copium because he was triggered that Beato seemed to be talking down to genres that he really likes. And because of that, he felt the need to justify their workload.
100. I think 100% all the people that were mad at Rick Beato are just mad because it seemed like he was criticizing the music that they like, and nobody goes, that's his opinion, man, it's okay. I'm a death metal fan, okay? Do you know how many times I hear people go, how could you listen to that? It's just a bunch of screaming, it sounds like chaos. Okay, it's not for you.
And I feel like also this point that Rick is making is maybe a wee bit classist and ignores the economic barrier to entry that a lot of musicians who would like to produce face when they are trying to think up or come up with drum parts for their songs.
What the fuck are you doing? At this point, you are intentionally misrepresenting Rick so that you can impugn his character so that you can win moral points with your woke shitheads who are on your stupid fucking channel. Rick came up in a time when it took more money to do less in the music industry, and musicians were more broke than today. To insinuate that Rick Beato does not understand the plight of the poor musician is strictly disingenuous. Rick may not be the deepest thinker, but he is not deaf to the plight of the poor musician. There is nothing cringier than Marxist virtue signaling.
All right, before we dive too deep into this one, first I want to acknowledge Become the Night is correct that it's not fair for Anthony Fantano to put it in a way where it makes it seem like Rick Beato doesn't understand the plight of starving artists. For sure, it was much harder and it cost way more money back in Rick Beato's day than it does now. For sure, all of this technology that we're debating makes it to where anybody, including children without a job, can afford to make music in their bedrooms. Okay, now, remember earlier when I said that Become the Night is going to assign positions to Fantano that he doesn't hold? Well, here we are. So because Fantano brought up the fact that poor people exist, if you bring up class in any sort of way, then he must be a woke Marxist. Nowhere in this video did he espouse the virtues of Marxism. Now, maybe Become the Night knows Fantano personally and has had conversations with him and has heard him say, yeah, I think we should seize the means of production. But somehow I doubt it. If I'm wrong, totally, I'll take that L, put it in the comments. Y'all watch Fantano's content. Maybe y'all have seen him say, seize the means of production. I haven't seen it. Okay. But what the right does is anytime anybody brings up issues of class, they say communist. Kind of the same way the left, anybody that holds a position even marginally to the right of Bernie Sanders must be a Nazi. It's assigning positions to people that they don't hold. And in fact, if you are right-wing, you should read Sam Francis or James Burnham, because they based a lot of their right-wing philosophy on Marxist ideas, because class issues do exist. The plight of the working man is definitely hard and worth consideration. And just by bringing up class and people's varying levels of privilege does not you a woke Marxist make.
But chalking this up as classism is not just a stretch. It is an intentional misrepresentation of the conversation around the homogenization of music.
And I will say this again, adding in the context that Rick seems to be very concerned with the fact that producing sounds, guitar amplifiers, fake drums, so on and so forth, it's all too easy to use. So once more, I will say that things being harder to do does not mean that the end result is better.
This is an absolutely fair point, and I agree. It doesn't directly address the music homogenization point, but I think that it's good pushback against Rick's more boomer intuitions. That needs to be said.
And if you ask Rick, I'm sure he would agree with that statement. There's no way that Rick Beato thinks that merely being difficult is equivalent to quality. However, when it was difficult, you couldn't just fart out an idea in your bedroom and immediately hit publish. There was some filtering that went on. All these technologies comes with pros and cons. The pro being that there's no gatekeepers, and the con being that there's no gatekeepers.
In the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s, these eras of music that Rick and a lot of his fans often will just sort of like worship and point to as like, this is the golden era. This was like when things were perfect. This is when people were doing the work and walking uphill 10 miles to and from school. Yeah, that is true. There were a lot of difficulties that came with the process of music creation during that time, but
didn't you just say that back then it was easy as pie for Frank Sinatra to do it? Now you're saying, yeah, there was some difficulties. Come on, man. Come on, man.
A lot of the music that was coming out around that era was still trash. Complete and utter garbage, like, bad, shitty novelty albums, annoying, gentrified vocal jazz bullshit, crappy, kitschy pop orchestra records, holiday shit.
Again, excellent point. Many boomers fetishize classic music and classic records as if all of the old music sounded that good back then, and it certainly didn't.
No arguments there. Every era of music has its terrible. There's so much trash going on because so many people want to do it, and not everybody is Led Zeppelin, not everybody is Opeth or Bolt Thrower. It would be impossible. So yeah, there's a lot of copycat music that's being made in every single era, and for sure, people look back at their childhoods with rose-colored glasses and they think about the great stuff. They think about, I don't know, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and they go, man, back in my day, bands were awesome. And they completely forget about all the real trash bands that they just memory hold. But for sure, if you were in the room with them when they were sitting around talking about music the way we talk about music on Twitter now, you would have heard them go, oh man, that band sucks. Because that's all music discourse amongst all music fans in the past, in the present, in the future, forever. There will always be people going, oh man, that band sucks. And there will always be people complaining about all the copycat music. That's just the nature of music. Yeah, for sure, this is a good point.
To bolster Fantano's point more, Rick goes off on a whole tangent later in the video where he talks about how buying records back in the day made people value music more. If we are going to accept that as a true statement, what Rick doesn't realize is it also made people value trash music a lot more too. If you were purchasing an album, you were hoping it wasn't gonna suck. Because in many cases, kids were only allowed to buy a certain number of albums a year, or maybe they could only afford a certain number of albums a year. And you would wear out those records, the good tracks and the filler tracks. You would learn to love those crappy filler tracks. I had a similar experience with CDs when I was younger, because my parents very much limited what CDs I could not only purchase, but even be exposed to when I was a child.
Brother, can I relate to that? Not only could I not afford all the CDs that I wanted, but also my family was evangelical Christian, so I also had to hide all the CDs that I wanted.
And without opening another can of worms, I feel like Rick's final point here sort of ignores the effects of things like capitalism and audience demand and Spotify algorithms and how they all sort of like toxify the music consumption circle these days. Meanwhile, Rick over here is like concerned trolling about phones.
Agreed. Consumerism and music as a business are far closer to the roots of the problem than the music technology. Leaps and bounds agree. It's these cultural characteristics that give rise to the technology and how the technology is used. But the hit makers stick to a formula or stick to a group of formulas, and there are more people chasing hits than ever before. A bigger contributor to this is the motivation to make this music in the first place. I hope that Fantano and I could agree on that. But making music creation more user-friendly and streamlined definitely also incentivizes people to choose these more vanilla options.
Yes, this is it. The pros, because I just said, this is like my overarching point on the whole podcast, is it's not one or the other. Don't take these arguments to their logical conclusion, to their extremities. There are pros and cons. There are trade-offs to any new developments. Some of them good, some of them bad. So for instance, the ease of making music and the ease of consuming music, the pro is the gatekeepers are no longer an obstacle for getting your music out to the world. You can make music on the cheap and you can upload it to Spotify, and maybe the world will notice. It's made it easier than ever before, where so many people back in the day would have fallen through the cracks. And it's so much easier to collaborate with great musicians with the technology. So many pros to this. And the cons are, there's no gatekeepers anymore. There's no filters. And there's so much trash music because anybody in their bedroom can just make music and put it on Spotify. And when I go through the list of new releases every Friday and I listen to 36 bedroom black metal projects where there's this baked in excuse because of the black metal culture where you're not supposed to have polished production. It sounds ass on purpose. And I gotta sort through that. It's a con. It is an inevitable con, and me making that criticism is not me saying that bedroom black metal musicians shouldn't be able to do it. Don't take it to its logical conclusion. Don't take it to its extremity. It is a valid criticism that is not the entirety of all of black metal. I listen to those 36 bedroom black metal projects every Friday because sometimes somebody out there is really talented and we get to discover them, and it's awesome.
Because it's very easy to say, oh, there's all these like really neat niches happening everywhere where all this really cool stuff is happening because of music tech. It's like, yeah, but like how many hard people on the planet are actually consuming that? And how many hard people on the planet are consuming
that was awesome. 1,000 points to become the knight for that. That was awesome.
Rick then goes into the second part of his video where he talks about music consumption and how he thinks it's too easy to consume music. Rick uses a sync as a mediocre and drawn out metaphor for streaming music. Then he tries to say something about recycling and how much new music is added to Spotify. This section really didn't make any sense.
No. There's a lot of music being added to Spotify every day, and AI music is coming. It's going to get real bad real soon, and nobody's coming up with a plan.
The point is, if they want to find better music, they actually need to put that work in to find that better music.
No, you don't. All you gotta do is watch Heavy Metal Philosophy, because I tell y'all every weekend the best new metal albums that come out. I give you a big list of all the great stuff. You ain't got to do any hard work at all. Just hit that subscribe button. YouTube exclusive, by the way. The weekend show is YouTube exclusive. For my audio only listeners, I'm sorry. There's a multitude of reasons why my recommendation show is only on YouTube, mainly because it's such a visual experience. Hit the link in the description.
Throughout all of the history of recorded music, this has been a thing of just passively consuming what's in front of you. And making all music consumption more inconvenient is not going to change this. I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about the devaluing of the economic value of music in the market because of higher volume, oversaturation. But I don't think that that directly makes people less passionate about art. I can see why you might think that because, like you say, sweat equity, it is a thing. But I think that art transcends all of that by a lot because money does not have inherent meaning unless you want to give the numbers inherent meaning. But the beauty, the transcendence of the art does have inherent meaning. And that is, in my opinion, more valuable than the money itself.
I love this point. This is the best point out of all of our videos, be it Rick's video or Anthony's video, but my video, Become the Night, has the best point here. I love this point. When art is great, regardless of the technology, it is so meaningful that it is impossible to quantify. When I listen to All That Was Promised by Half, regardless of the technology that they took advantage of to make that music, it is so special that I can't put a price tag on it. Art transcends that, and no matter how crazy the technology gets, be it ease of recording or AI, which I keep warning everybody about, the best stuff, the most transcendent stuff will, listen to that word I just said, transcendent, by its very definition, will rise to the top. And that's what I want artists to chase, and that's what I want consumers to appreciate.
Kids don't care about music anymore because it's free and they don't need to work a job to be able to pay for a record that they want at the record store that they've been desiring, totally ignoring like the culture of record taping during that time and how, people used to record albums for each other that they may have not even had to.
This is not the point that you think it is. I know that in an abstract sense, when you think about taping records, it seems like free music but there is a fundamental difference between me being able to listen to almost every song that's ever recorded at an instant on demand for $10 a month right now versus having to ask my friends to tape a record that they have that I don't have, and in return I'll tape a record that I have that they don't have. You absolutely cannot compare today's on-demand listening in an instant with the tape trading scene.
And, you know, honestly, for my own fucking sanity, I wish what Rick was saying was 110% true. Because if it actually was the case that just kids don't care about music anymore, do you know how free of harassment and bullshit and psychosis my mentions would be on any given day? I mean, the music from the artist they're defending must matter something to them on some level, even though they're just streaming it for free on Spotify.
Yeah, that's a good point. No notes.
It's kind of a good point, but not really. I've experienced this because I put out a video where I gave respect to Five Finger Death Punch, and I will fully admit I was kind of shitty about it. I kind of made a big joke about it. I was sarcastic, but the ultimate message of the video was giving respect to Five Finger Death Punch because the lead singer said he was going to retire from metal to spend more time with his children. And I absolutely respect somebody that's trying to be a good father. But because in that video, I did some joking criticism, I got so many death threats from that video. The most unbelievable misspelled messages, more than any other video that I've ever done criticizing any other band. But once again, these are super fans. If I put out a video criticizing Candlebox, right? A good band, but not a band that has the kind of super fans that Five Finger Death Punch does, I'm not getting any death threats for criticizing Candlebox, you know? So once again, this is the super fan effect. And let me point out the obvious here, an effect of the technology that people can just from all over the world anonymously comment on what you're saying. This is once again an example of pros and cons of the technology. The con being that all these shitheads can threaten my literal life. The pros being 99.9999% of my comments are overwhelmingly positive and supportive, and there's so many great people out there where we just want to enjoy the music. Come on, y'all. You can't judge the world based on these negative comments.
There is a real phenomenon worth addressing here, both with the homogenization of music, but also with how amazing music technology has made it for the independent musician. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Maybe I'll make a longer video expressing my point of view on all of this later. There's a lot to untangle, and it's very difficult to organize all these thoughts.
Yes, and that should be the takeaway. Like I said, every Friday I listen to all the new metal albums that release, and yes, I have to sift through some slop. Every weekend, exclusively on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, I shout out great independent musicians. I purposely have a section before the top 5 where I talk about the big signed major label artists to separate them from the artists that are coming up, because it's not fair. And the fact that I can listen to all of that music on demand and share it with all of you, and you can go out and immediately listen to that music, is amazing. There are trade-offs to that technology. There are pros and cons. I think it's a net positive, but that does not mean that it is without certain negatives that have real and valid criticism to talk about that we could perhaps improve.